At Fort Jackson, a young recruit named Marcus Reed faced relentless humiliation from his commanding officer, a man who seemed determined to break him simply for standing tall. Sergeant Cole's cruelty wasn't just harsh discipline, it was personal, cutting deep with words meant to wound, not to teach. But when danger struck during a live fire drill, Marcus's courage and selflessness exposed the true measure of strength, and the truth about who he really was. And just wait until you see how fate turned the tables in this story, and how justice found its quiet, unforgettable way. The morning sun beat down on Fort Jackson, burning through the mist that still clung to the training field. The smell of cut grass mixed with sweat and dust, filling the air with the heavy silence that always comes before the storm of a drill. A line of new recruits stood shoulder to shoulder, their uniforms stiff, their faces tense. Then came the sound, steady, sharp, and rhythmic. Thud, thud, thud. Sergeant Raymond Cole paced before them, his boots striking the ground with the precision of a metronome. Every step echoed authority, every glance carried judgment. He was a man built for command, broad shoulders, thick arms, and a stare that could silence a crowd. Years in service had etched his face with lines of discipline and something colder, a hardened pride that left no room for compassion. He stopped abruptly, his eyes scanning the row of nervous recruits. Then his gaze locked on Private Marcus Reed, tall, lean, and quiet, the only black recruit in the platoon. Cole's lips twitched into something between a smile and a snarl. "Where you from, boy?" he barked. "Atlanta, Sergeant," Marcus replied, voice firm but respectful. Cole tilted his head, as if the name of the city offended him. "Figures," he muttered, pacing a slow circle around Marcus. "City boy, thinking he can handle real soldier life. Bet you never worked a hard day in your life, huh?" "No, Sergeant," Marcus answered, keeping his eyes fixed straight ahead. Cole's tone grew sharper. "Don't talk back. You'll learn your place here." A few recruits shifted uncomfortably. They could feel it, the tension, the sting of unfairness that hung in the air. But no one dared to speak. The rules were clear. Recruits don't question sergeants. Not ever. From that moment on, Marcus Reed wasn't just another trainee. He was Cole's target. Every drill, every inspection, every routine, Cole found a way to single him out. When the platoon ran their 5-mile conditioning, Cole made Marcus run 10. When others dropped for push-ups, Marcus did double. If a mistake was made, Cole found a way to pin it on him. "Reed, you're slowing everyone down. Drop and give me 50. Reed, those boots shine like you polished 'em with mud. Start over." But it wasn't just the orders. It was the tone behind them, a tone dripping with something darker than discipline. It was personal. One afternoon, during gear drills, Cole ordered the platoon to haul heavy packs across the field. When the group lagged behind, Cole barked, "Reed, carry theirs too. Let's see that city strength." Marcus didn't argue. He hoisted the extra gear and trudged across the field, his breath heavy but steady. Cole's voice followed him, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Guess your people are used to labor." The words landed like a slap across the field. A few recruits froze mid-step. One clenched his jaw, another lowered his head, pretending not to hear. No one spoke. No one dared. Marcus felt the sting, deep and burning, but he said nothing. His face stayed calm. His pace stayed strong. If Cole wanted to break him, he wouldn't give him the satisfaction. And that silence, that unflinching calm, only made Cole's anger grow. Over the next few days, the sergeant doubled his efforts. He made Marcus scrub the barracks floor long after lights out. He assigned him night watch twice as often as the others. He even made him redo completed drills, claiming they weren't up to standard. To the others, it became clear what was happening, but the military wasn't a place for complaints. A few whispered among themselves in the mess hall. "Cole's got it out for him. Yeah, he's gonna push Reed till he quits." But Marcus didn't quit. Every morning he was first to line up, boots polished, posture perfect. He met Cole's commands with quiet focus. No backtalk, no resentment, just endurance. Quiet and unbreakable. Cole noticed, and it made him furious. The sergeant's authority depended on fear, on seeing men crack under pressure. But Marcus Reed refused to break, and that, more than anything, felt like defiance. By the end of the week, Cole's shouts were louder, his punishments harsher. Yet Marcus's resolve only deepened. When the platoon gathered one night, exhausted and silent, a recruit finally whispered, "He's not gonna quit, is he?" Another shook his head slowly. "No, and that's what scares Cole the most." The line between control and obsession had blurred for Sergeant Cole, and though Marcus didn't yet know it, his quiet strength had already begun to change the balance of power. One step, one breath, one silent act of defiance at a time. The rain fell in heavy sheets, soaking through every layer of fabric, turning the training field into a pit of mud and misery. The recruits trudged through it with tired faces and aching limbs, their breaths forming clouds in the cold night air. But Sergeant Cole's voice sliced through the storm like steel. "Reed! You think you're done?" Marcus looked up, chest heaving, his uniform clinging to his skin. He had just finished the obstacle course, carrying his full pack across the slick terrain. But Cole wasn't satisfied. He never was. "Grab that sandbag," Cole barked, pointing to the heavy sack lying by the track. "Let's see if your pride can carry that too." Without a word, Marcus lifted it and dropped to his hands and knees. The mud swallowed his palms. Each crawl forward felt like pushing through a storm made of earth and exhaustion. The cold bit deep, but Cole's voice stayed hotter than fire. "Look at this sorry excuse for a soldier," Cole shouted to the watching platoon. "You think anyone like you ever made a difference in this army?" The recruits stood silent, their faces pale in the rain. A few glanced away, guilt written in their eyes. But no one stepped forward. No one dared. Marcus pressed on. His muscles trembled with every movement, his body screaming for rest, but his will refused to break. Every time he pushed forward, it wasn't just against the weight of the sandbag. It was against the years of doubt, the whispered words that told him he didn't belong. By the time Cole finally called it off, Marcus could barely stand. His uniform was soaked, his body spent, his spirit caught between anger and despair. Cole didn't offer a single word of acknowledgement, just a glare, the kind that said you'll never be enough. That night, the barracks were quiet. The air was thick with unease. Marcus sat on the edge of his bunk, staring at his trembling hands. The cuts and bruises from the day throbbed under the dim light. Around him, the other recruits avoided eye contact, unsure of what to say. They had all seen what happened, but silence had become their safest shield. He wanted to believe it didn't matter, that he could push through it, but the words echoed in his head like a cruel chant. "You think anyone like you ever made a difference?" For the first time, doubt crept in. Maybe Cole was right. Maybe he didn't belong here. He reached for a piece of paper, his fingers stiff and cold, and began writing. It was a request for discharge, his way out, his escape from the constant humiliation, the endless weight of someone else's hatred. But when he opened his locker to place it inside, his eyes caught the photo taped to the inside of the door. His mother, standing tall, holding a folded flag close to her chest. Her eyes, tired but proud, looked back at him. The memory of her voice returned, soft but steady. "You fight with dignity, Marcus. That's what your father did." He remembered her telling him how his father had never lost his pride, even when life gave him every reason to. That strength had been passed down, hidden somewhere inside Marcus. Not loud, not burning like Cole's rage, but steady like the heartbeat of something unbreakable. He looked at the half-written discharge form. His breath steadied. Then, with deliberate calm, he tore it in half. The sound of the paper ripping through the still air felt final, like drawing a line between who he was and who he would become. Marcus sat back down, his body still aching, but his mind sharpened by resolve. He knew now that quitting wasn't an option. Not for him. Not after everything his family had endured for him to be here. Outside, the storm began to fade, the rain softening into a quiet drizzle. The barracks filled with the low rhythm of breathing recruits, lost in uneasy dreams. Marcus closed his eyes too, not to escape, but to gather strength for what was coming next. Because Sergeant Cole had made one mistake, he thought breaking Marcus would end the story. But all he had done was wake the part of Marcus that refused to bow, the part that turned pain into purpose. And that fire was just beginning to rise. The weeks that followed felt like an endless climb uphill. Each sunrise over Fort Jackson brought new drills, new tests, and the same cold stare from Sergeant Cole. But something had changed. Not in Cole, but in Marcus. The pain that once weighed him down had turned into focus. Every command, every challenge, he met with steady precision. He didn't do it for approval. He did it for himself. And for the memory of the man in the photograph taped to his locker door. Then came the day every recruit both dreaded and anticipated, the live fire drill. It was the final test before graduation, a simulation of battlefield conditions meant to measure not just skill, but courage under pressure. The field stretched wide under a gray morning sky, the smell of dust and fuel in the air. Cole paced before the line of recruits, his smirk as sharp as ever. "Let's see who's ready for the real world," he said, his gaze lingering on Marcus. "Try not to disappoint your little fan club." Marcus said nothing. He adjusted his gear, his jaw set. The exercise began with a thunder of blanks echoing through the air. Recruits moved low across the terrain, diving behind barriers, shouting commands. Marcus advanced with calm precision, every movement controlled, his senses tuned to the rhythm of the drill. Then it happened. A sudden burst of simulated gunfire, too close, too loud. One of the recruits froze, paralyzed by fear. The boy stood upright, an easy target in real combat conditions. Cole shouted for him to get down, but his voice couldn't reach through the panic. Without hesitation, Marcus sprinted across the field. He dropped low, tackled the recruit, and pulled him safely behind cover, just as a wave of blank rounds burst overhead. Dirt kicked up around them, but Marcus didn't flinch. He shielded the boy with his own body, calm and steady until the exercise ended. When the final whistle blew, The field fell silent except for the ringing in their ears. Slowly, the recruits lifted their heads and saw Marcus helping the frightened soldier to his feet. The young man looked shaken but unhurt. Even Cole stood speechless for a moment, his usual confidence cracked. He knew what had just happened. A near miss that could have ended badly if not for Marcus's quick action. The platoon broke into quiet applause, growing louder until it filled the air. For the first time, Marcus wasn't the target of whispers. He was the reason for them. Respect, once withheld, began to grow. Cole tried to maintain his posture, but his voice lacked its usual edge. "Good reaction, Private," he said, the words stiff and unfamiliar. Marcus simply nodded. "Just doing my job, Sergeant." The next morning, the base carried a different energy. Word of the incident had spread fast. When the platoon assembled for roll call, a black car approached the field. Out stepped Colonel Whitmore, a name that carried weight across every corner of the base. Cole straightened his uniform, eager to impress. "Morning, sir." "To what do we owe the visit?" But the colonel didn't look at him. His eyes found Marcus. "Private Reed," he said firmly. "I've been waiting to meet you." Cole blinked. You know this recruit, sir?" Whitmore's expression softened slightly. "I served under his father, Major David Reed, one of the most decorated officers I ever had the honor to command. Died saving 12 men in Kandahar." The words hit the field like a wave. Every recruit stood frozen. Cole's color drained as realization dawned. He glanced at Marcus, at the name he had shouted so many times with disdain, and now saw it in a different light. Marcus stood tall, silent, pride and emotion warring in his eyes. Whitmore turned to Cole, his tone sharpening. "I hope you've been treating his son with the same respect the Major earned." Cole's mouth opened, but no sound came. "Sir, I didn't know." Whitmore's response was cold and cutting. "That's the problem, Sergeant. You never cared to." The silence that followed was absolute. No one dared to move. Cole looked down, his authority stripped bare before the men he had tried to control through fear. Whitmore placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Your father would be proud, son. You carry his spirit well." As the colonel walked away, the recruits' eyes stayed on Marcus, no longer as a target, but as a leader. Even the quietest among them felt it. The tide had turned. Cole didn't shout that day. He didn't need to. The message had already been delivered, not through punishment or pride, but through the quiet power of dignity. For Marcus, it wasn't victory over a man. It was victory over doubt, over silence, over every voice that said he couldn't. And as the morning sun rose over Fort Jackson once more, it didn't cast long shadows anymore. It caught on his shoulders, bright and steady, like the start of something new. The winds at Fort Jackson carried a quieter tone in the days that followed. Word of the live fire drill, and the truth revealed by Colonel Whitmore, had spread through every barrack and corridor. The once boisterous sergeant's voice, which used to thunder across the training fields, was now absent from morning drills. An internal review was conducted swiftly. Cole was reassigned to a logistics post far from the parade grounds, where no recruits would ever again stand trembling under his command. The decision wasn't announced publicly, but the message was clear enough. Respect wasn't a request. It was a requirement. Whispers rippled through the ranks. The army had changed that day. The story of Marcus Reed, the recruit who endured the storm and stood tall through it, became something larger than the man himself. It wasn't just about strength anymore. It was about dignity, patience, and quiet resilience. Weeks later, graduation day arrived beneath a sky so blue it seemed painted. The air smelled of fresh polish and new beginnings. Recruits stood in crisp formation, boots aligned, heads high. The parade ground shimmered with pride and relief. Marcus stood at the front of his platoon, his uniform pressed to perfection, the faint gleam of his commendation ribbon catching the light. His eyes moved across the faces beside him, the same men who once avoided his gaze, who now saluted him with genuine respect. They had seen him rise, and in doing so, had learned what real strength looked like. At the far end of the field, Sergeant Cole stood among the observers, his usual confidence replaced by something quieter, a mix of regret and reflection. He didn't bark commands now. He simply watched. Colonel Whitmore stepped forward, his medals glinting in the sunlight. His voice carried through the air, steady and proud. "Some men earn their rank by years of service," he said, "and others earn it by what they carry within. Private Marcus Reed, your courage under pressure and your unwavering discipline bring honor to this uniform and to the name you bear." He pinned a commendation to Marcus's chest, the small metallic click echoing like a final note in a long, difficult song. "Your father would be proud," Whitmore said softly. Marcus nodded, emotion tightening his throat. "Thank you, sir." Applause rolled through the formation, first from a few hands, then from the entire crowd. It was more than ceremony. It was a collective recognition of what he had endured and overcome. When the parade concluded and the crowd began to thin, Marcus stepped aside near the flagpole, where the wind lifted the stars and stripes high above the base. The sound of footsteps approached from behind, slow, hesitant. It was Cole. He stopped a few feet away, his cap in hand, his expression weighed down by humility. "Private Reed," he began, the words halting, "I was wrong. About you." About a lot of things Marcus studied him quietly, seeing not the man who once shouted him down, but someone struggling to find a way back from his own mistakes. "You were right about one thing, Sergeant," Marcus said calmly. "This army makes men, if they survive what tries to break them." Cole nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "I suppose it does." Then he turned and walked away, leaving Marcus with the sound of the wind and the steady rustle of the flag above. Marcus looked up at it, the same flag his father once saluted before his final mission. The sight filled him with a sense of peace, not because the pain was gone, but because it had purpose now. He wasn't just his father's son anymore. He was his own man, shaped by hardship, tested by cruelty, and refined by resolve. The recruits gathered around him, their voices rising in celebration. They cheered not for rank or medal, but for what Marcus represented: endurance without bitterness, victory without vengeance. And, as the cheers swelled, the story of the bullied recruit who rose above hate spread through Fort Jackson like wildfire, told in mess halls, whispered in bunks, remembered by every new soldier who arrived. Justice, they would say, hadn't been shouted. It had been earned. And Marcus Reed had earned it, not with anger, but with silence, courage, and grace that no one could strip away. The flag waved above him, bright and steady against the sky, and for the first time Marcus smiled, not as a survivor of the storm, but as its calm, lasting light.